All right. Who's excited about like VR in general? Who's terrified? Who's terrified? You guys are so indecisive. Everything's great. Okay, let's keep this moving. Please welcome to the stage Leap Motion's Michael Buckwald and iFluence's Jim Margraff and our moderator Lucas Matney.
All right, hello everybody. Okay, so for the last 50 years, the mouse and the keyboard have been the way that we interact with computers. With AR and VR, that's not really the way it's going to look. I brought these guys up here because they have the most impressive demos for VR and AR right now. If you guys could just start off by telling me in about 15 or 20 seconds, what's something that you can do with eye tracking or hand tracking that you can't do with anything else right now?
Okay. Michael?
Sure. So, I mean, hands let you directly interact with the virtual world. So you can grab an object like a block and you can pick it up and you can throw it exactly like you would in real life. And anyone can see their hands and they can basically interact with anything on a one-to-one basis just instantly based on that intuition that is their own hands.
Okay. Thanks. So 2020 Olympics, you pop on a VR headset, you're a mobile command and control center. You look at a dozen screens, you see a drone, and you control it with your eyes, and you make it fly over a crowd. Then you take your eyes and you spin around a 360 camera. Then you look at a picture of an officer's location, if this security case. You see him, you connect with him with your eyes and open up a call and say, hey, I'm speaking to you, Officer Tibbetts. You look through an AR headset that he's wearing, and it has an external camera. It's looking around the crowd. And you see what he is not only looking at, but you see what he's seeing and exactly where his eyes are looking. You see that in your VR headset, and then you say, by the way, look here. And you're looking at a spot in his field of view that he sees reflected in his AR headset, and he responds and he looks there at the same time as you.
Okay, so for those of us not controlling drones, why do we need AR and VR? Like, what's in it for the consumer?
Well, I think that in the last 30 years, we've seen a lot of things change about the underlying power of computers, but we haven't really seen a similar evolution in terms of the ways that we interact with them or the ways that we visualize that data. And I think if you combine a change in input with being able to look at things in 3D, suddenly we can actually take advantage of all of that underlying power. And suddenly, people can put on a headset and they can see their hands, they can use their eyes, and they can feel like they've been teleported to a different world. Their kids can develop the same native intuition that we have for the physics of throwing a basketball, but they can do it for quantum gravity, or they can do it while learning about dissecting animals. And that's the sort of virtual reality that people deserve, and it's the sort of virtual reality that people expect. But it has to be both input as well as the display.
I think it will connect us to information and to experiences and evolve us and evolve our consciousness as we look, for instance, at what it means to be able to augment your world with information that you need, whether it's possibly someone's name or whether it's information about a situation or whether it's engaging in a game that is, as we've seen what happened in Pokemon Go. Those are early signs. If we look at VR, that's about expanding consciousness, possibly in addition to entertainment and productivity. It's about giving information to you at a rate that had not been possible before and in density that hadn't been possible before. So I think it's the next human-computer interface.
So I think a lot of people are a little reticent about VR, AR tech just because, when you're talking about immersion and immersing yourself in these digital worlds, there's something kind of scary and dystopian about that. What are your thoughts in that regard?
It's interesting. When we first looked at it a few years ago, people looked at the notion of slamming yourself into a headset and isolating yourself from people. I think what we're finding now is instead of reducing social interaction, it's increasing it. It will increase it because there's an opportunity to connect and communicate, certainly with eye interaction, because you can see and respond to first avatars and then actual faces. So I think that the notion of being isolated will dissolve pretty quickly. And I think the whole idea of AR just will augment our ability to see and access information and to think.
But in terms of your technology where you're, say, looking at a person and then you're like, hey, I want to, see if they have a cool job and it's worth talking to them. So I go into their LinkedIn profile, kind of zoom through a few pages. Like at that point, and my eyes are just going ding, ding, ding. Am I not kind of, have I lost looking at the person and actually engaging? They just kind of see me go dead for a second, and then
Right. Well, let me pull out my phone and see what happens when I just stare at this as we're talking right now, which
Sure.
happens all the time.
Okay.
I think, but more so, I think it's about courtesy and how we evolve the way that we use this technology. One of the things we've looked at is a courtesy mode. Simply, if you and I are looking at each other and we have AR glasses on, the courtesy mode recognizes that we're looking at each other, and it just blocks messages for that time. So it recognizes your wrist won't buzz, your pocket won't buzz, your ankle won't buzz, and I think it will help us respect the type of communication that's due when we're communicating.
Am I going to go cross-eyed while using your platform?
Only if you're converging on something very close to you, at which point the eye tracking will recognize that you're doing that and say, wait a second, don't do that.
Okay, all right. Sounds good, sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, Michael, in terms of, hand tracking, when I touch something in real life, I feel it, and that, to me, conveys a lot about that whole interaction. How do you get past that in VR with Leap Motion's tech?
One of the things that's been most amazing that we've seen is that when you track the hands really accurately, and when they move sort of instantly when the user moves them, and when they can see them in 3D like they can in VR for the first time, then people can walk up to a device who've never used it before, and your brain actually thinks you are supposed to have felt something when you grab that virtual block. So we find that maybe 70 or 80% of people report that their brain is actually sort of telling them that they have gotten some haptic feedback. But even for the other people who don't, I think that fundamentally, in the same way that you could, even if you were wearing a heavy glove, you could grab something in real life 100% of the time, even if you didn't feel it. The same thing is absolutely true for VR. And that's really the power of combining hands and VR, because thanks to human evolution, and thanks to all of the sophistication and the massive part of our brain that's dedicated to doing these sorts of actions, every single person alive can put on a VR headset, they can see their hands, they can see a button, or they can grab something, and they can just push it or pull it. And we've tested, for example, bringing in 500 people to our office who had never used VR before, never used Leap Motion before, and we asked them to do something like push a square when it lit up in a 4x4 grid, or grab a ball and drop it. And those users were able to do that after a few rounds at 95% and 98%. And that was really impressive to us. And that really spoke to how this can be actually better and more accessible, even though it's high tech. And I think that's the most ideal form of new technology, when even though it's new technology underneath the hood, when it actually increases and it opens up a new platform to everyone, like the iPhone did.
So your tech's certainly impressive, but you guys have been, you're not new to the space. You've been around for about 6 years or so, and without too much commercial success. Are you kind of shifting your focus entirely to VR, or is your PC Mac product kind of going to stick around for a bit?
Yeah, so we've always been trying to solve the same problem, which is this belief that people are capable of so much more with computers than they are doing now, because at the end of the day, there is this very, very massive difference between the exponential increase in the power of computing, where now everyone in this room has something that would have been a supercomputer in their pockets 15 years ago. But if you compare that to the ways that we actually use these devices or interact with these devices, it's still essentially binary. You're pushing a key or not. You are touching or not touching a touchscreen. And we've always felt that when we would get to a point where the hand tracking was as good as reality, then we would have accomplished that goal, and we would let people reach into virtual space. And now, even though it's taken 5 or 6 years, with Orion, I think we've gotten there in terms of the accuracy of the hand tracking. And I think VR is there in terms of the market that absolutely needs this sort of 3D interaction in order to have the type of experience that people want and deserve in VR.
Cool. Now, Jim, is there a kind of intersection of hand tracking and eye tracking, or is it kind of one or the other when it comes to AR interaction?
Yeah, well, I think that when we look at multimodality and different forms of input for AR and VR, clearly we have voice, we have hands, we have head, we have eyes. And what's key is to identify the best mode for the best task. So, for instance, look at Tony Stark, Iron Man, and he's using his hands to manipulate things. Or go back to Tom Cruise in Minority Report. The general notion of pointing at things to launch a menu or to navigate through a menu can be done in tens of milliseconds with your eyes versus the time it'll take you to use your hands to do that. So in that case, your eyes just are blazingly fast. On the other hand, say you want to grab a virtual object and hold it and move it around and look at it from different sides. And then you'd like to look at that object and find out the volume or maybe change its color and morph it in some way. Well, you could start with your hands and then you could continue with your eyes. With your eyes, what we do is we transform intent into action through your eyes. And we do this without blinking, without waiting, without dwelling. So you look, and basically it's a matter of looking and action occurs. Gotcha. So when you make that happen, it happens at speeds that have never been realized before. And it's so simple, it's very powerful.
Michael, do you buy that? Do you think that there are things that eye tracking can do better than hand tracking?
I think there are use cases for both, definitely. Okay. I think also voice will play an important role because I think that most people agree that the future and the most units are going to be mobile, and next year that'll probably be mobile VR, but then AR as well. And I think in a world where people are wearing their headsets with them and bringing them around with them on trains and planes, sort of raises a question of what inputs you have. And you have your hands with you usually, which is good. You have eyes, fortunately. You have voice. You probably don't have a keyboard or any controllers or anything like that. And I think that hands are great for direct physical and spatial input. Voice is good for like categorical or text input. And I think your example of the ability to use the eyes to know and tell the developer what region someone's looking at, so that they can zoom in on it, for example. I think that's a great combination. So even though it's tempting to say that one input solves all the problems, I think that any stack of inputs, especially if they're natural and they leverage that, the things that we always have with us as people, I think that they'll all be useful and critical for VR and AR.
If I could add to that on that point that was mentioned, we have a demo where you're scrolling through either AR or VR a set of text messages. And with your eyes, you're scrolling through it just looking, nothing else, no blinking, no winking, no waiting. And you find a message and you say, gee, I'd like to respond to that message. With your eyes, you initiate a response, at which point you begin speaking. When you speak, your text is transcribed in front of your eyes, you see it there, you realize there's an error in it. With your eyes, you launch an edit mode, you correct the mistake possibly with your eyes or by speaking, and now you have multimodality, which works really, really well. You've seen this.
Sure.
It works like that.
I think the one thing I love about your platform is, though, it's something that I could sit down on a subway and go through without looking like a moron for the most part. But I feel like voice recognition and voice control just isn't quite there yet in that capacity because, whereas eye tracking is so discreet, like if all of a sudden then I yell at a text message in the subway, that doesn't quite fix text input very well. Is there something that can work with text entry other than voice search, or is that pretty much all there is for AR?
There's currently the state of the art that has been shown publicly for entering text with your eyes is anachronistic. It uses a QWERTY keyboard with eyes with dwelling, one letter at a time. And typically, people with disabilities or anyone is limited to about entering maybe 20 words a minute. We speak 120 to 150 words a minute. We'd like to be able to input information that fast. We've developed means that go way faster than that with your eyes. And we see also opportunities to, using a variety of technologies, to blow that out. I'd like to see us get to the point where we can input information, the effectively communication ideas that approach the rate of speaking, and without necessarily speaking in public, and believe that's possible.
So does VR replicate, is the goal of VR to replicate our own senses while the goal of AR is to kind of reinvent them in some sort of way so that we can attack problems in new ways? I mean, do you have thoughts on this, Michael?
Yeah, I think if we can just make ourselves feel visually and in terms of input through a connection, something that feels similar to the real world, I think that will have achieved a lot for VR, because I think if you can put on a headset and you can feel like you're in the streets of Paris, you can feel like you're on the surface of Mars or in a simulation exploring like space or something, that's a massive achievement, because there are all sorts of things that we can do in reality that we can't approach doing in computers and technology. And there are huge advantages to being able to do them in technology, because like in the real world, I might be able to like dissect a frog or like play with a ball, but I can't actually like save that thing I create or send it with other people or like do it jointly with someone across the world like I can with technology. So I think we would have achieved a massive exponential shift if we can just get the input and the sense of immersion for VR to be the same. But I think for AR, I think if you can get to a point where you're overlaying and projecting something that is physically indistinguishable from reality over the environment that you can interact with using your hands, then and other inputs, I think that really changes everything. It changes all consumer electronics, obviously, because you don't need a TV anymore, you don't need a projector, you don't need a phone. But it also kind of changes our very conception of time and space, because and reality, because our children will grow up sort of playing with their friends in Bangladesh, like in the streets of Paris, and they will grow up like learning about objects in a way that will make us seem stupid again, especially, and I think that's true actually for VR and AR. I think that no matter how good people will be able to become just based on our own skills and intuition, I think that as children develop like and grow up with the technology, using their hands and voice and eyes, I think that they're going to, just like with other generations previously, we seem stupid or our parents seem stupid with technology and iPhones and computers and such. That's absolutely going to be us when kids grow up in a world where they have used their hands to interact with computers and their eyes with VR and AR.
I think more and more people are looking towards this future, but there's been so much hype lately in the VR AR spaces, and I feel like it's kind of dying down a little bit, maybe as the consumer products either didn't deliver or the content isn't quite there yet. How do you feel about that, and does it make you nervous at all, or do you disagree? Any thoughts?
See, I want to give a quick comment on your question before. I think I'll offer two terms. One I'll call reentry syndrome, and the other called reality conundrum. Reentry syndrome is what happens after you've been in a virtual world, which doesn't just replicate our world, it goes way, way past this. And as resolution increases, we know the laws of physics dissolve in this world. The sensory input you have and the sensory output that you can manage will change the way you interact and the way you think. If you spend a few hours in virtual environments. Yesterday I was on Mount Everest. I was on my knees talking to a gnome. And when this happens, when you emerge from that, there's an issue. We're going to see that happen in the coming years.
Yeah, there are only so many of those experiences, though. Like I feel like the content's not quite there. Like back to the question about the hype. Like where do you think that's at?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, at this point, a lot of hype with expectations. It's not there yet for a variety of technical reasons, and also I think even more so, the creative contribution hasn't caught up even to the technology we have right now. Because what's coming out and behind closed doors is much better than what we see today. It takes a while for that to ribbon or other things that are happening.
Sure, Michael.
Yeah, I think that really we shouldn't look at the current generation of things as a consumer product stage, because in reality I think it's kind of a beta that has been shipped as a consumer product, because Oculus Rift shipped with an Xbox controller and not the end desired controller. So I think, and I think that we haven't even seen products ship like on mobile, which will be shipping next year, that will start to integrate input and such. And I think that right now, probably the biggest thing that's holding it back is input. And I think that once you have input in place, then developers can start to create content, and whether that's hands or even just like the permanent choice of controller and input, you have to have that in place for a long time before developers can actually create content that is the real end content. So I think that we're just in a very early stage and sort of an awkward stage. But I think that we're going to see a lot of growth next year as companies like Oculus ship out their touch type controllers. But also, I think that we're going to see a lot of companies ship all-in-one mobile type devices that will be kind of like Oculus's, but will be ARM powered. And I think that those will be the ones, probably the first devices that will have things like hand tracking in them. And I think they'll also be the most mainstream in terms of applications, and be focusing on things like people watching and consuming content from their home, like educational uses, and games, but not the same focus on absolute realism, pixel perfect graphics. And I think we've seen from mobile that really, with any new technology, there were so many generations of smartphones before the iPhone. And it's really just about the perfect combination of input, content, and technology and user experience. And you just kind of have to, the space kind of has to just iterate with it a little bit at a time. And I think that a lot of companies are getting close. And I think that a lot of the problems have solutions now. And I think that next year we're going to see, hopefully, that sort of iPhone moment where it goes from a very niche product like the Palm Pilot with graffiti to that iPhone moment where fundamentally every single person alive uses this as something that affects their daily life, which is definitely what's necessary to live up to the hype.
So we just have a few seconds left. I think the main question I have to ask you guys, because you know a lot about immersing yourself in digital environments, are we living in a simulation right now? Jim, any thoughts? I feel like you know something. All right, Mike, the jig is up, guys. All right, well, thanks so much for coming on here. We obviously realize we're living in a simulation, but it was great having you guys. Thanks. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Guys, great chat.